Revenge is better served cold.
The applause felt hollow against my ribs. Standing in the wings of the Lyceum Theater, I watched Clara take her final bow, her crimson dress catching the stage lights like spilled wine. The audience loved her, they always did. "Brilliant performance tonight," Julian whispered behind me. But he wasn't talking to me. His words were meant for Clara, who had just swept off stage, her face glowing with that post-show euphoria I'd fallen in love with 12 years ago. "Theo!" Clara grabbed my shoulders, her eyes bright with adrenaline. "Did you see how they responded to the bedroom scene? Pure electricity." I forced a smile. "You were magnificent." She kissed my cheek, leaving a trace of stage makeup, then spun toward Julian. "And you!" That final monologue gave me chills. Julian's grin was practiced, theatrical. "Chemistry, darling." It's all about chemistry. The after-party at Sardi's buzzed with the usual theater crowd. Agents, critics, investors. I nursed a whiskey at the bar while Clara worked the room like a politician. She'd changed into a black cocktail dress that hugged her curves, drawing eyes from every corner. "Your wife's a star," said Margot Flynn, sliding up beside me. The producer's silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her eyes sharp as surgical steel. "That performance tonight, magnetic." "She has a gift," I agreed. "And what about you, Theo? Any new projects brewing?" I'd been directing for 15 years, mostly off-Broadway productions that earned critical praise but modest paychecks. Clara was the breadwinner now, her name above the title, while mine appeared in small print in the program notes. "Taking a break," I said. "Clara's career needs my full attention." Margot's smile was knowing. "How modern of you." Across the room, Clara threw back her head, laughing at something Julian said. Her hand rested on his arm, lingering longer than necessary. I'd noticed these small intimacies building over the past month of rehearsals. The way she'd touch his shoulder during line runs, how they'd whisper together during breaks. I excused myself and headed toward the restroom, needing air. The narrow hallway was quieter, muffled by old brick walls and framed photographs of Broadway legends. As I pushed through the men's room door, I heard voices from the women's room next door. "Incredible tonight," a voice was saying. It sounded like Sarah, one of the ensemble actresses. "The chemistry between you and Julian is off the charts," another voice added. Then I heard Clara. "It's easy when you're working with real passion instead of—" She paused, and I pressed closer to the thin wall. "Theo's sweet, but he's safe, predictable. Julian brings fire." My chest tightened. "Are you serious about him?" Sarah asked. "I don't know yet, but I need to figure out what I want. Theo and we've been together so long, I forgot what it feels like to burn." The bathroom door opened and footsteps echoed out. I stood frozen, my reflection staring back from the cracked mirror above the sink. Predictable, safe. When I returned to the party, Clara was deep in conversation with a Broadway blogger, her public smile perfect and practiced. Julian caught my eye from across the room and raised his glass in a mock toast. The ride home was quiet. Clara stared out the taxi window at the blur of Manhattan lights, her fingers drumming against her thigh. "Great reviews tonight," I said. "Mm-hmm." The Times critic seemed especially impressed. She turned to me, her expression distant. "Theo, I need to talk to you about something." My stomach dropped. "What is it?" I think I need some space. Time to focus on myself, on my career. This show opened doors I never expected." The taxi stopped at our brownstone in the village. Clara paid the driver while I sat motionless, processing her words. "Space," I repeated as we climbed the front steps. "Not forever, just time to figure things out." Inside our apartment, surrounded by 15 years of shared memories, she began packing a suitcase. I watched from the doorway as she folded the black dress she'd worn tonight. "Is there someone else?" I asked. She stopped folding. "It's not about someone else, Theo. It's about me." But her phone buzzed on the dresser, and I caught Julian's name on the screen before she grabbed it. "I'll stay at Rebecca's place for a while," she said, not meeting my eyes. 2 hours later, I sat alone in our living room, scrolling mindlessly through my phone. A notification popped up. Clara had gone live on Instagram. The video showed her at some rooftop bar in Soho, laughing with Julian and the rest of the cast. Then Julian leaned in and kissed her. A real kiss, not the stage kind. The comments exploded with heart emojis and congratulations. I set the phone down and stared at the empty Scotch glass in my hand. Predictable. Safe. Maybe it was time to change that. The apartment felt like a museum of someone else's life. Clara's coffee mug still sat in the sink, lipstick stains around the rim. Her theater books lined the shelves, bookmarks sticking out like tiny surrender flags. I called in sick to the consulting job I'd taken to pay bills between directing gigs. Then I began erasing myself. Facebook account deleted, Twitter gone, Instagram wiped clean. I canceled the landline, closed joint bank accounts, transferred my portion to a new account under my middle name, Vincent. The credit cards went into the shredder along with our wedding photos. Clara texted twice, "Hope you're okay, and we should talk soon." I didn't respond. The real estate agent was a sharp-dressed woman named Patricia who seemed impressed by our brownstone's original hardwood floors and exposed brick. "In this market, you'll have offers within a week," she promised. I sold everything. Furniture, appliances, even Clara's expensive espresso machine. The wedding ring went to a pawn shop in Queens, traded for $800 cash. Within 2 weeks, I'd vanished from the life I'd built. No forwarding address. No social media presence, no trace of Theodore Vance in Manhattan. The cabin I found through Craigslist sat on Lake George, 3 hours north of the city. The owner, an elderly man named Frank, needed someone to house-sit through winter while he visited his daughter in Florida. "Quiet up here," he warned as he handed me the keys. "No neighbors for half a mile. Gets lonely." Lonely sounded perfect. The cabin was small, one bedroom, a kitchen with 1970s appliances, and a living room dominated by a stone fireplace. A desk by the window overlooked the lake, which had already begun to freeze at the edges. I set up my laptop and started writing. Meanwhile, Clara and Julian's romance dominated theater gossip sites. They appeared on red carpets together, their photos splashed across Broadway World and Playbill. The entertainment press loved the story. Two passionate actors who'd found love on stage and off. I followed their coverage obsessively, taking screenshots and building files. Clara gave interviews about finding herself and embracing new beginnings. Julian posted Instagram stories from their matching tattoos, small theater masks on their wrists. At night, I wrote. The story poured out of me in ways my previous scripts never had. Raw, honest, brutal. I called it The Marriage of Mirrors and told myself it was fiction, even as I borrowed every detail from my marriage's collapse. The protagonist was Richard, a theater director whose wife leaves him for her co-star. But unlike me, Richard doesn't disappear. He plots, he schemes, he makes them pay. I wrote under the name A.V. Caldwell using my initials and Clara's mother's maiden name. The irony wasn't lost on me. By January, I had a complete first draft. 90 pages of dialogue that cut like broken glass, monologues that exposed the ugly truth behind artistic pretension, and a final act that would leave audiences breathless. The script was good, better than good. It was the best thing I'd ever written, born from pain and sharpened by rage. On February 14th, Valentine's Day, I opened my laptop and composed an email to Margot Flynn. I'd kept tabs on her projects. She had a reputation for taking risks on provocative material. "Dear Miss Flynn," I typed, "I believe I have a script that will challenge audiences and generate significant buzz. The Marriage of Mirrors explores the destructive nature of passion and the price of artistic ambition. I think you'll find it unforgettable." I attached the PDF and hit send before I could second-guess myself. Then I poured a glass of whiskey and watched the sun set over the frozen lake, waiting for the game to begin. Margot Flynn's response came 3 days later. "Mr. Caldwell, this script is explosive. Call me immediately." Her voice crackled with excitement through the phone. "I've been producing for 20 years and I've never read anything this raw." The dialogue burns off the page. You think it's producible? With the right cast and director, this could be the most talked about play of the season. I'm thinking off-Broadway first, maybe the Public Theater. Build buzz, then transfer to Broadway if it takes off. My heart raced. "Do you have someone in mind to direct?" "Simon Wells. He's been looking for edgier material after that debacle with Suburban Prayers." "You know Simon?" I knew him well. We'd worked together years ago on a production that had imploded when Simon had a nervous breakdown during Tech Week. He was talented but unstable, prone to anxiety attacks and creative paralysis. Perfect. "I've heard good things," I said. "What about casting?" "That's where this gets interesting. The female lead, Miranda, she needs to be someone with classical training but also raw vulnerability. Someone who can handle the emotional brutality of that final monologue." I gripped the phone tighter. Any thoughts? Actually, yes. Clara Vance just finished a spectacular run at the Lyceum. She's got the range and the name recognition. Plus, the character feels written for someone exactly like her. The irony was delicious. And the male lead? Julian Pierce would be perfect opposite her. They have history, real chemistry. The audience would eat it up. I managed to keep my voice steady. That sounds like inspired casting. There's just one thing, Margot continued. The script is anonymous. I'll need to meet you in person before we move forward. My lawyers insist. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop in the village. I took the train down from Lake George wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses, feeling like a spy. Margot was smaller than I remembered, her silver hair now shoulder length. She studied my face carefully as I approached her corner table. You look familiar, she said. I have one of those faces. She slid a contract across the table. Standard option agreement. 6 months to get the production mounted, with extension clauses if needed. I signed as A.V. Caldwell, my handwriting deliberately different from my usual script. Now, she said, about the ending, that bang. Non-negotiable, I interrupted. The play builds to that moment. Without it, there's no catharsis, she nodded slowly. It's certainly memorable. I just hope we can find a theater brave enough to stage it. Over the next week, I tracked the production's progress through industry websites and social media. Margot officially optioned The Marriage of Mirrors for a summer production. Simon Wells signed on as director, calling it a searing examination of love's darker impulses. Then came the casting announcements. Clara was offered the role of Miranda first. According to Broadway World, she'd initially hesitated. The part was emotionally challenging, but ultimately couldn't resist the opportunity to work with Simon Wells. Julian's casting took more finesse. I created a fake email account and sent Simon anonymous suggestions. Have you considered Julian Pierce for David? His recent work shows remarkable depth. Within days, Julian was attached to the project. The casting announcement hit the theater press like a bomb. Real-life couple Clara Vance and Julian Pierce to star in provocative new drama. I smiled as I read the coverage from my lakeside cabin. The critics were already speculating about the parallels between the actors' real relationship and their fictional counterparts. If they only knew. Rehearsals began in March at a rented studio space in Chelsea. I couldn't resist driving down to watch from across the street, parking where I could see into the large windows of the third-floor rehearsal room. Clara looked thinner than in her publicity photos, her cheekbones sharp under the fluorescent lights. She wore yoga pants and an oversized sweater, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. Julian, meanwhile, had grown a beard for the role, or maybe just because Clara liked it. Simon paced around them like a caged animal, his hair wild and unkempt. Even from a distance, I could see his agitation in the sharp gestures and rapid movements. I'd been sending him emails, not directly, of course. I'd created multiple fake accounts, theater students, aspiring writers, anonymous fans, all offering suggestions for the production. Most were ignored, but some got through. The Miranda character needs more vulnerability in Act 2, I'd written from a Columbia Drama Program email address I'd spoofed. What if she reveals her childhood trauma through subtext rather than direct dialogue? Simon had incorporated the suggestion, adding improvisation exercises that forced Clara to dig deeper into Miranda's psychological wounds. Consider having David's final speech delivered directly to the audience, another email suggested. Break the fourth wall, make them complicit in his rage. That idea made it into rehearsals too. I watched through those windows for hours, studying the way Clara and Julian moved together. Their stage chemistry was undeniable, but I could see cracks forming. Julian kept checking his phone during breaks. Clara seemed frustrated with Simon's increasingly erratic direction. The tabloids were having a field day. Backstage drama. Are Clara Vance and Julian Pierce's relationship problems affecting their performances? One particularly brutal piece in the New York Post quoted an unnamed source. Clara's been having meltdowns during rehearsal. Julian seems more interested in his Instagram followers than learning his lines. I smiled. Those anonymous sources were easier to plant than most people realized. 2 weeks into rehearsals, I made my first direct contact. During lunch break, I slipped into the building through a side entrance and made my way to the third floor. The rehearsal room was empty except for a young woman organizing props, Eva, according to her name tag, the production's assistant stage manager. "Excuse me," I said, approaching from behind. Is Simon Wells around? She turned, and I quickly stepped back into the shadows of the hallway. He just left for lunch. Can I help you? I'm A.V. Caldwell, I said, keeping my voice low. The playwright. Her eyes widened. Oh my God! Everyone's been wondering about you. Simon has so many questions about the script. I prefer to stay anonymous during the process, but you can tell Simon that I'm available by email if he needs clarification on any scenes. I backed further into the shadows. The ending especially, I want to make sure the bang effect is done right. It has to feel real. I'll let him know, Eva said, squinting into the darkness. Wait, do I know you from… But I was already walking away, my footsteps echoing in the empty stairwell. That night, I sent Simon a lengthy email about the final scene. The tool must be handled with absolute precision. I suggest using a real weapon loaded with blanks fired by an actor trained in stage combat. The audience needs to believe, for just a moment, that something terrible has actually happened. Simon's response was immediate. Your vision is brilliant. We'll make it happen. I leaned back in my chair, watching moonlight reflect off the still lake. The pieces were falling into place. Clara was about to perform the role of her life, built from the wreckage of our marriage. Julian would deliver my words about betrayal and consequences, and I would be there, invisible in the audience, watching justice unfold. The marriage of mirrors, indeed. The New York theater world thrived on gossip, and by April, Clara and Julian were front-page material for all the wrong reasons. Broadway's golden couple in crisis, screamed the Post's entertainment section, featuring a grainy photo of Julian leaving a Soho bar with someone who definitely wasn't Clara. I read every word from my cabin, savoring the details like fine wine. The anonymous source, me, naturally, with information carefully leaked through a freelance photographer I'd hired, painted a picture of a relationship crumbling under pressure. Julian was partying late, missing rehearsals, and flirting with understudies. Clara was having panic attacks, questioning every line, every gesture. She's becoming impossible to work with, I'd whispered to a Variety reporter outside Sardi's, my voice disguised with a fake accent. Simon's about ready to recast the role. That quote made it into print with delicious results. Clara's agent called an emergency meeting with Margot Flynn. Clara herself showed up at the next rehearsal red-eyed and defensive. I watched from my usual spot across the street as she stormed into the building, Julian trailing behind like a scolded puppy. My phone buzzed with another email to Simon, this one from a concerned theater professor at NYU. I've been following your production with great interest. Might I suggest that the Miranda character deliver her final monologue as written, without the cuts your actor has requested? The playwright's original vision seems essential to the play's impact. Simon had mentioned in an interview that Clara was struggling with one particular speech in the final act, a brutal soliloquy where Miranda confesses her most shameful thoughts about her marriage. Clara had asked to soften some of the language to make the character more sympathetic. Over my dead body. I crafted the email carefully. Miranda's honesty in that moment is what makes her tragic rather than simply pathetic. If the actress can't handle the material's emotional demands, perhaps she's not right for the role. The next morning, Broadway World reported that Simon had insisted on keeping the original script intact. The playwright's vision is sacred, he was quoted as saying. We're not here to make anyone comfortable, but my masterpiece was yet to come. I'd been saving the cruelest cut for last, a line buried in Miranda's climactic monologue that I'd lifted directly from one of Clara's interviews. A year ago, she'd done a profile piece for American Theater magazine, talking about the difference between safe relationships and passionate ones. Sometimes you have to choose between security and electricity, she'd said. I spent too many years choosing safety, settling for someone who loved me more than I loved him. Art demands more courage than that. The interviewer had been charmed. The quote had been featured prominently, even used as a pull quote in large text. Now those words were Miranda's, delivered as a weapon aimed at her husband's heart. I emailed Simon a final revision to the monologue, framing it as the playwright's definitive vision. The new version included Clara's exact words, almost verbatim. Simon's reply was enthusiastic. This revision is devastating. Clara will hate performing it, but that's what makes it so powerful. Perfect. By the time opening night arrived in May, the theater press was buzzing with anticipation. Marriage of Mirrors had generated more pre-opening controversy than any play in recent memory. Critics were already declaring it either a masterpiece or a disaster, no middle ground. Julian had been photographed with 3 different women in the past month, none of them Clara. Their relationship status was officially complicated, according to their publicists. Clara herself had stopped giving interviews, citing the need to focus on the work. But paparazzi shots showed her looking hollow-eyed and thin, smoking cigarettes outside the rehearsal studio. I felt no sympathy. She'd made her choices. Now she could live with the consequences. The final piece fell into place 2 days before opening. I mailed Simon a package containing a vintage prop pistol I'd purchased from a theatrical supply company, along with detailed instructions for its use in the climactic scene. "This weapon will give the ending the authenticity you're looking for," my note read. "Use it exactly as specified, and your audience will never forget what they've witnessed." Simon's response was immediate. "You're a genius. This production is going to make history." He had no idea how right he was. The Orpheum Theater buzzed with opening night energy. Critics, Broadway investors, and theater insiders filled the lobby, champagne glasses clinking in a symphony of anticipation. I stood in the back corner, wearing a baseball cap and fake glasses, my beard grown out to change my appearance. No one recognized the man who'd once been married to the star. Margot Flynn held court near the bar, resplendent in a silver gown, fielding questions from reporters about her mysterious playwright. AV. "Caldwell is fiercely protective of his privacy," she explained to a Times critic, "but his work speaks volumes." Through the theater's glass doors, I could see photographers lined up outside, flashbulbs popping as minor celebrities arrived. This was exactly the kind of event Clara lived for. The spotlight, the attention, the validation. She was about to get more attention than she'd ever dreamed of. The first act unfolded like a dance I'd choreographed from memory. Julian's David was charming but hollow, a man who confused charisma with depth. Clara's Miranda was all vulnerability and hunger, desperate to feel something real. During intermission, I heard fragments of conversation. The dialogue is vicious. Clara Vance is giving the performance of her career. That playwright, whoever he is, has serious issues with women. I smiled and ordered another whiskey. Act 2 turned darker. Miranda's affair began as passion but revealed itself as selfishness. David's betrayal cut deeper than expected, his pain raw and recognizable. But it was the final scene that I'd crafted for maximum impact. The lights dimmed as Julian entered stage left, carrying the prop pistol I'd provided. Clara stood center stage, bathed in a single spotlight, delivering Miranda's final monologue. "Sometimes you have to choose between security and electricity," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "I spent too many years choosing safety, settling for someone who loved me more than I loved him. Art demands more courage than that." A murmur rippled through the audience. Several critics were taking notes frantically. They recognized the words from Clara's own interview. Julian raised the tool, his face a mask of hurt and rage. "You want electricity?" he snarled. "Let me give you something to feel!" The bang cracked through the theater like thunder. Clara's eyes widened in shock as she stumbled backward, her hand pressed to her chest. The audience gasped collectively, then applauded, thinking it was brilliant staging. But Clara didn't take her bow. She collapsed to her knees, then pitched forward onto the stage floor. Julian stood frozen, the smoking gun still in his hand. "Clara," he whispered, but his voice wasn't projecting. This wasn't part of the script. Blood began pooling beneath her body. Someone in the front row screamed. Then chaos erupted, people shouting, standing, pushing toward the exits or the stage. I remained perfectly still in my corner, watching the curtain fall on my greatest work. Clara Vance would never mock another marriage, never again choose electricity over loyalty. The marriage of mirrors was finally complete. The Orpheum Theater transformed into a crime scene within minutes. EMTs rushed on stage while police officers herded the panicked audience into the lobby. I stayed pressed against the back wall, invisible among the chaos. Julian sat on a prop chair staring at his hands. His face had gone completely white, and he kept repeating, "It was supposed to be blanks." The tool was supposed to have blanks. Detective Sam Morales arrived 20 minutes later, his rumpled coat and tired eyes suggesting he'd been pulled away from another case. I watched him survey the scene, taking notes in a small notepad. "Time of death?" he asked the medical examiner. "Approximately 10:47 p.m. Single bang wound to the chest, close range. She would have died within minutes. Julian finally looked up from his hands. This is impossible. We rehearsed this scene 50 times. The tool was loaded with blanks. Who had access to the weapon? Morales asked. The props master, the stage manager, me. Julian's voice trailed off. Jesus Christ, Clara's dead. This can't be real. I felt nothing watching his breakdown. No satisfaction, no remorse, just a hollow completeness, like finishing a particularly difficult crossword puzzle. Margot Flynn stood near the stage, her silver gown now wrinkled and stained with tears. We need to cancel the run immediately, she told anyone who would listen. This is a tragedy. Actually, Morales said, this is a homicide investigation. Nobody leaves until we've talked to everyone. The interrogations began in the theater's green room. I listened from the hallway as Julian gave his statement. I picked up the tool from the props table 5 minutes before the scene. Same routine as always. Point, pull the trigger, Clara falls, curtain drops. Except tonight, she really fell. Who else handled the weapon today? I don't know. Maybe Eva, the stage manager, or Tim, the props guy. Everyone's been so careful with it. But when they brought in Tim Morrison, the props master, his story got interesting. I loaded it with blanks at 6 p.m., same as every night, kept it locked in the prop cabinet until places were called. But when I went to check on it around 9:30, the cabinet was open. Open how? Not broken into. Someone with a key had been there. Morales made another note. Who has keys to the props cabinet? Me, Simon the director, Eva the stage manager, and the theater's master key holder. I shifted closer to the door, straining to hear every word. But here's the weird thing, Tim continued. I found this note taped inside the cabinet. He handed over a piece of paper. It said, use the alternate weapon for tonight's performance. A.V. Caldwell. My heart rate spiked, but I kept my expression neutral. I'd never written any such note. Morales studied the paper. Have you seen the playwright's handwriting before? Never. He's been a ghost through this whole process. When they called Eva in for questioning, I pressed even closer to the door. She was the only person who might have seen my face clearly during that brief encounter weeks ago. The playwright visited during rehearsal once, she told Morales. Real mysterious guy, stayed in the shadows. Said his name was A.V. Caldwell. Can you describe him? Medium height, dark hair, maybe mid-40s? He wore a baseball cap, kept to the shadows. But there was something familiar about him. Familiar how? I've been working in theater for 8 years. You see the same faces over and over, directors, actors, designers. I swear I'd seen him before, but I can't place where. My mouth went dry. Eva was sharper than I'd given her credit for. The investigation continued through the night. By 3 a.m., the police had collected the murder weapon, interviewed every cast and crew member, and established a timeline of events. The facts were damning for Julian. He was the last person to handle the tool. He had motive. His affair with the understudy had become public knowledge, threatening his relationship with Clara, and he'd been drinking heavily before the show. As dawn broke over Manhattan, Detective Morales made the arrest. Julian Pierce, you're under custody for the murder of Clara Vance. Julian's sobs echoed through the empty theater as they led him away in handcuffs. The tabloid photographers waiting outside went wild, capturing every moment of his humiliation. I walked out through a side exit, my work complete. Clara was dead. Julian's career was destroyed. And I remained invisible, the ghost who'd pulled the strings from the shadows. Justice, I reflected, sometimes required careful orchestration. The story dominated every newspaper in the city. Broadway murder. Actor eliminates co-star during performance. I read the coverage from a diner near the Port Authority, nursing coffee and watching the morning news on a small TV mounted in the corner. Julian's mugshot appeared on every channel, his eyes red with tears and disbelief. Pierce maintains his innocence, the news anchor reported, claiming someone switched real bullets for the prop tool's blanks. Police have found no evidence to support this theory. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mr. Caldwell, this is Margot Flynn. We need to meet immediately. Please, call me. I waited 2 hours before responding, playing the role of a shocked playwright who'd just learned about the tragedy. We met at the same coffee shop where I'd originally signed the option agreement. Margot looked like she'd aged 5 years overnight. her silver hair unwashed and her usually immaculate makeup smeared. "This is a disaster," she said without preamble. "Clara's dead, Julian's in jail, and the press is calling our play cursed." "I'm devastated," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Clara was a remarkable talent. The police want to talk to you. They have questions about the script, the prop tool instructions, everything." My pulse quickened, but I maintained my composure. "Of course, I'll cooperate fully." She slid a contract across the table. "I'm also going to need you to sign away your royalties. The production is dead, but there might be insurance claims, legal settlements. My lawyers say it's cleaner if the playwright distanced himself from the whole mess." I pretended to study the document, though I'd expected this moment. "All royalties to be donated to charity, the Clara Vance Memorial Fund for Emerging Theater Artists." The irony was perfect. I signed without hesitation. Detective Morales called me that afternoon. His voice was gruff, professional. "Mr. Caldwell? I'd like to ask you some questions about your play and the production." We met at a precinct office in Midtown, a fluorescent-lit room that smelled of stale coffee and bureaucratic frustration. Morales was younger than his tired voice suggested, maybe 40, with intelligent brown eyes and prematurely gray temples. "Strange situation," he began, opening a manila folder. "Broadway playwright nobody's ever heard of writes a play about adultery and murder. Play opens, leading lady gets murdered by her real-life lover. Hell of a coincidence." "Tragic coincidence," I corrected. "You based the characters on real people?" I leaned back in the plastic chair, projecting the confidence of someone with nothing to hide. "All fiction draws from life, detective. Miranda and David are archetypes, the unfaithful wife, the betrayed husband. You'll find those dynamics in everything from Shakespeare to soap operas. But the dialogue in that final monologue, critics are saying it matches an interview Clara gave last year, almost word for word. Great minds think alike." Or maybe Clara was drawn to the role because she identified with the character. Morales made a note. "Tell me about the prop tool. You sent specific instructions about using a real weapon." "For authenticity. Theater magic only works when the details are perfect. I wanted the audience to feel the weight of that moment, the genuine fear. Who else knew about your instructions?" "Just Simon Wells, the director. I trusted his judgment about implementation." "And you never visited the theater during rehearsals?" This was the dangerous question. Ava's description was vague enough to create doubt, but I couldn't risk a direct lie. "I may have stopped by once or twice. Writers get curious about their work. Eva Kimmel says she spoke with you backstage. Says you looked familiar." I shrugged. "I've been in New York theater for 20 years. Everybody looks familiar after a while." Morales closed the folder. "Where were you last night between 6 p.m. and midnight?" "At my cabin upstate, Lake George. I drove down this morning when I heard the news." "Anyone who can verify that?" "I live alone, but I made some calls, ordered dinner from a local place. There'll be records." He handed me his business card. "Don't leave town without notifying me." This investigation isn't over. Walking out of the precinct, I felt the first flutter of genuine nervousness. Morales was smart, methodical. He sensed something was wrong, but couldn't quite identify what. That evening, I returned to my cabin and built a fire in the stone fireplace. The flames danced hypnotically as I fed them pages from my original notebook, the one where I'd first planned Clara's destruction. Every draft, every cruel detail, every moment of rage that had fueled this revenge, it all turned to ash and smoke. But as I watched the evidence burn, I couldn't shake the image of Detective Morales' eyes. He was still hunting, still piecing together a puzzle he didn't understand. The game wasn't over yet. Julian Pierce's meltdown became America's favorite cautionary tale about fame and hubris. The tabloids couldn't get enough of his downfall. "From Broadway to Broad Stripes," screamed the Post, featuring a photo of him in an orange jumpsuit. I followed every detail from my lakeside sanctuary, cutting out newspaper articles and creating a scrapbook of destruction. Julian's agent dropped him. His endorsement deals evaporated. The romantic comedy he'd been set to film was recast within a week, but the real devastation was personal. Julian's family released a statement distancing themselves from him. His former co-stars gave interviews expressing their shock and disappointment. Social media turned him into a pariah overnight. "I never trusted him," posted Sarah, the ensemble actress from Clara's final show. There was always something cold about Julian, like he was performing even when the cameras weren't rolling. The legal proceedings moved swiftly. Julian's public defender, A harried woman named Lisa Chen fought an uphill battle against overwhelming evidence. The weapon bore only Julian's fingerprints. He'd been seen handling it moments before the fatal shot. His motive was clear to everyone. "My client is innocent," Chen insisted at every press conference, but her voice lacked conviction. Julian himself seemed to be falling apart in custody, losing weight, and developing a nervous twitch that made him look guilty on camera. The preliminary hearing was a media circus. I sat in the back row of the courtroom wearing different clothes and a new pair of glasses, invisible among the crowd of reporters and curiosity seekers. Julian looked terrible. His beard had grown wild in jail, and his orange jumpsuit hung loose on his diminished frame. When the prosecutor read the charges, murder in the second degree, his shoulders shook with silent sobs. The defendant had motive, means, and opportunity, District Attorney Patricia Hawkins declared. Clara Vance was leaving him for another man. His career was in decline while hers soared. He saw his chance during that final scene and took it. Julian's defense was pathetic. Someone else must have switched the bullets, but who and why? The prosecution painted him as a desperate man who'd lost everything and lashed out in rage. The evidence was overwhelming. Security footage showed Julian entering the props room alone 20 minutes before the show. The tool bore only his fingerprints. 3 witnesses testified that he'd been drinking heavily and seemed agitated before the performance. But then Lisa Chen dropped a bombshell that made my blood freeze. "Your Honor," she announced during a sidebar conference that I strained to overhear, "we've obtained evidence that the murder weapon was purchased 2 days before the shooting. Not by my client, by someone else entirely." My hands gripped the wooden bench. This was impossible. I'd been careful, used cash, worn a disguise. The judge allowed Chen to present her evidence, security footage from Phillips & Associates tool store in Queens. The timestamp showed 2:47 p.m., 3 days before opening night. The figure on screen was clearly male, medium height, wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses. He paid cash for a .38 caliber revolver, identical to the one that eliminated Clara, but the image was grainy, dark. The man's face was obscured by shadows and the hat's brim. "This proves someone else was planning Clara Vance's murder," Chen argued. "Someone who wanted my client to take the blame." The prosecutor objected. "Even if someone else bought a similar weapon, there's no evidence connecting this tool to the murder weapon." "Mr. Pierce could have purchased the bullets separately." The judge agreed to allow the footage as evidence, but ruled it didn't prove Julian's innocence. I left the courthouse feeling unsettled. Chen was smarter than I'd anticipated. She was building a reasonable doubt defense, suggesting a mysterious conspiracy against her client. That night, I received an unexpected visitor at the cabin. Detective Morales stood on my front porch, his coat collar turned up against the October wind. "Beautiful place you got here, Mr. Caldwell. Mind if I come in?" I had no choice but to invite him inside. He studied the sparse furnishings, the laptop on the pine desk, the cold fireplace filled with ash. "Been following the Pierce case?" he asked, settling into an armchair. "Hard to avoid? It's all over the news. Defense attorney thinks someone framed her client, thinks the real butcher is still out there." I poured 2 glasses of whiskey, my hands steady despite my racing heart. "Do you believe that?" Morales accepted the drink and studied my face. 25 years on the force, I've learned to trust my instincts. And my instincts tell me this case isn't as simple as it looks. Sometimes the obvious answer is the right answer. Maybe, but that tool store footage got me thinking. Someone planned this murder carefully. Bought the weapon in advance, knew exactly when and how to use it. That level of premeditation doesn't match Pierce's personality. You've profiled him? Talked to everyone who knew him. Julian Pierce is impulsive, emotional, narcissistic. But he's not a planner. This murder required patience, intelligence, and perfect timing. Morales stood and walked to my desk, studying my laptop. "Tell me, Mr. Caldwell, have you ever been married?" The question caught me off guard. "Why do you ask?" "Your play, The Marriage of Mirrors, it's written with such intimate knowledge of betrayal. The husband's pain feels very real, very personal. Writers observe life, detective. We collect human experiences and transform them into art. Sure, but this feels like more than observation. It feels like confession." He turned to face me, his gray eyes sharp and calculating. "Ava Kimmel called me yesterday. Said she finally remembered where she'd seen you before." My chest tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. Oh? Seems you used to direct off-Broadway productions. Small World, New York Theater. Everyone knows everyone else. I've worked on dozens of shows over the years, including one that starred Clara Vance. Small production called Northern Light, about 5 years ago. I directed that show during a brief reconciliation period in my marriage with Clara. She'd taken a pay cut to work with me, believing in the script when no one else would. Clara was very talented, I said carefully. According to Eva, you two seemed close during that production. Very close. Morales finished his whiskey and set the glass down. Here's what I think happened. You knew Clara personally. Maybe you were involved with her, maybe you just wanted to be. Either way, you watched her leave you for Julian Pierce, and it ate you alive. That's quite a theory, detective. So you wrote this play as revenge. Got them both cast in roles that mirrored their real lives. Then you orchestrated Clara's murder and framed Julian for it. The cabin was silent, except for the wind rattling the windows. I met Morales' stare without flinching. That's an interesting story, I said. But you'd need proof. He smiled grimly. Proof is exactly what I'm looking for, and I will find it. After he left, I stood at the window watching his car disappear down the winding lake road. Detective Sam Morales was more dangerous than I'd realized, but he was also too late. Clara was dead, Julian was facing life in prison, and I remained free. Sometimes the best revenge is the kind that can never be proven. The knock came at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in November. I'd been awake for an hour, watching the sunrise paint the frozen lake in shades of gold and pink. Eva Kimmel stood on my porch, clutching a manila envelope and shivering in the cold. Her breath formed white clouds as she spoke. "Mr. Caldwell? I need to talk to you." I let her inside, noting the dark circles under her eyes and the nervous energy in her movements. She'd driven 3 hours from the city to confront me. "Coffee?" I offered. "I know who you are," she said, ignoring the offer. "I figured it out 3 days ago." My heart rate spiked, but I kept my voice level. "I'm A.V. Caldwell. We've met." "No, you're Theodore Vance, Clara's ex-husband." She pulled a photograph from the envelope, a publicity shot from Northern Light, the production I directed 5 years earlier. Clara stood center stage in a flowing white dress, radiant under the lights. In the background, barely visible in the shadows, stood a younger version of myself. "I kept this photo because it was one of my first shows as an ASM," Eva continued. "I was so green, so eager to work with real artists." "You were different then, happier, more confident, but it's definitely you." I sat down heavily in my chair. The game was finally over. "Clara left you for Julian, didn't she?" Ava's voice was gentle now, almost sympathetic. "I remember hearing rumors about their affair during Marriage of Mirrors rehearsals, but I didn't know Clara had been married before." "We kept it private," I admitted. "Clara thought it was better for her image to seem available." "So you wrote this play as revenge. You got them both cast, orchestrated the whole thing." I studied Eva's face, trying to gauge her intentions. "What do you want from me?" "The truth." "Did you eliminate Clara?" The question hung between us like smoke. Outside, a loon called across the empty lake. "I wrote a play," I said finally. "That's all." Eva opened the envelope again and pulled out more photographs. Surveillance shots of me at the tool store, walking near the theater, sitting in this very cabin. "Detective Morales hired a private investigator to dig deeper into your background. These photos prove you've been planning this for months." My mouth went dry. "Those don't prove anything criminal. Maybe not individually, but together." She spread the photos across my coffee table, like tarot cards revealing an ugly future. "They tell a story of obsession and premeditation." "Why are you here, Eva?" "Why not take this to the police?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the photos. "Because I understand what it feels like to be betrayed. My boyfriend left me for my best friend 2 years ago. For weeks, I fantasized about making them pay. But you didn't." "No, but if I had, if I'd been as smart as you, as patient." She trailed off. "I might have done exactly what you did." I leaned forward. "What do you want? Julian Pierce is innocent. He's going to prison for something you did. Julian Pierce is a narcissistic actor who destroyed my marriage. If he goes to prison, that's poetic justice." Ava's expression hardened. Clara made her own choices. She didn't deserve to die for them. Didn't she? The words hung in the air like an accusation. Ava gathered up the photographs with shaking hands. "I'm going to Detective Morales," she said. I'm going to tell him everything. With what proof? Grainy surveillance photos and your theory about my identity? It'll be enough to raise reasonable doubt for Julian's defense. I stood and walked to the window, watching ice crystals form on the glass. Do what you think is right, Eva. But remember, theories aren't convictions. She left without another word, her car crunching over gravel as she drove away. That afternoon, I received another visit. Detective Morales arrived alone, carrying a different energy than his previous visit. Less exploratory, more predatory. Theodore Vance, he said, settling into the same chair he'd occupied before. That's your real name, isn't it? I go by Vincent now, my middle name. When were you planning to mention that Clara Vance was your ex-wife? You didn't ask. Morales laughed, but there was no humor in it. Eva Kimmel brought me some interesting photographs. You want to explain why you were buying tools and stalking theater rehearsals? I bought a tool for protection. This is an isolated cabin. As for the theater, I was curious about my play's production. Your play that happened to star your ex-wife and her new boyfriend? Coincidence? Like hell. Morales leaned forward. Here's what I think happened. You discovered Clara's affair, wrote this play as an elaborate revenge fantasy, then made it reality. You switched the blanks for live ammunition and let Julian take the fall. I met his stare calmly. Prove it. The tool store footage shows someone matching your description. A baseball cap and sunglasses? That describes half the men in New York. Your handwriting matches the note found in the props cabinet. This was news to me. What note? Morales pulled out an evidence bag containing a piece of paper. Through the plastic, I could read, "Use the alternate weapon for tonight's performance, A.V. Caldwell." I never wrote that, I said honestly. Handwriting analysis says otherwise. My mind raced. Someone had forged my signature, but who and why? Even if I had written that note, I said, it doesn't prove murder. Maybe I wanted them to use a different prop tool for artistic reasons. Morales stood to leave. You're smart, Vance. Smarter than Julian Pierce? Smarter than most criminals I've arrested? But you made one mistake. Which was, you cared too much. This wasn't a random eliminating. It was personal, and personal crimes always leave traces. After he left, I sat in the growing darkness, trying to piece together the puzzle of that forged note. Who had access to my handwriting? Who would want to implicate me further? The answer came to me as the first stars appeared over the lake. Julian's defense attorney, Lisa Chen. She'd realized her client was guilty but couldn't prove his innocence. So she'd manufactured evidence to cast doubt on the prosecution's case. It was brilliant in its way. Create a shadowy conspiracy, point suspicion at the mysterious playwright, force reasonable doubt into the jury's minds. But it also meant the investigation would intensify. Morales wouldn't give up now that he had a clear suspect and manufactured evidence to pursue. I poured a glass of whiskey and watched my reflection in the darkened window. The face staring back looked older, harder than the man who'd started this journey months ago. Clara was still dead. Julian was still facing prison, and I was still free, even if that freedom felt increasingly precarious. In chess, they called it zugzwang, a position where any move makes your situation worse. But sometimes the only winning move is not to play at all. Julian Pierce's trial began on a gray January morning that felt like the city's collective hangover after the holidays. I sat in the back row of the courthouse, wearing different clothes and a new pair of wire-rimmed glasses, just another anonymous observer drawn to Manhattan's latest spectacle. The prosecution painted Julian as a desperate actor whose career was crumbling, whose girlfriend was leaving him, who saw murder as his final dramatic scene. District Attorney Patricia Hawkins was ruthless and efficient, presenting evidence with the precision of a surgeon making cuts. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, she declared during opening statements, this case is about a man who confused his life with theater. Julian Pierce believed he could write a different ending to his story, one where Clara Vance paid the ultimate price for his humiliation. Julian sat at the defense table looking like a broken mannequin. The confident actor who'd once commanded Broadway stages had been replaced by a hollow-eyed stranger who jumped at every sound. But Lisa Chen proved more formidable than I'd expected. The prosecution wants you to believe this was a crime of passion, she told the jury. But the evidence suggests something far more sinister, a calculated murder designed to frame my client. She presented the tool store footage, the mysterious note in the props cabinet, Eva Kimmel's testimony about the shadowy playwright who'd visited. Rehearsals? Someone orchestrated Clara Vance's death with meticulous precision, Chen argued. Someone who knew both victims intimately, who understood their weaknesses and exploited them. My client isn't a murderer. He's another victim of this conspiracy. When Eva took the stand, I held my breath. She looked directly at me in the gallery before beginning her testimony. I saw A.V. Caldwell backstage during rehearsals, she said. He claimed to be the playwright, but there was something familiar about him, something wrong. Can you elaborate on wrong? Chen asked. He stayed in the shadows, wouldn't let me see his face clearly. And when he talked about the final scene, about the bang effect, he seemed excited, like he was anticipating something. Did you later discover the playwright's true identity? Yes. Through old photographs and research, I determined that A.V. Caldwell is actually Theodore Vance, Clara's ex-husband. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Several jurors leaned forward, suddenly interested, but the prosecution fought back hard. They brought in handwriting experts who testified that the note in the props cabinet was legitimate. They presented psychiatric profiles suggesting Julian's mental state had deteriorated during the production. Even if Theodore Vance wrote the play for revenge, Hawkins argued during cross-examination, that doesn't make him a murderer. Julian Pierce pulled the trigger. Julian Pierce's fingerprints were on the weapon. Julian Pierce had motive, means, and opportunity. The trial stretched into February. Each day, I watched Julian grow smaller, more defeated. The weight of public opinion crushed him like a vice. Even his own family seemed to believe in his guilt. But Chen kept hammering at reasonable doubt. She brought in ballistics experts who testified that the murder weapon could have been switched after Julian handled it. She presented timeline evidence suggesting someone else had access to the props room. The real butcher is sitting in this courtroom, she declared during closing arguments, her eyes sweeping the gallery, watching his plan unfold perfectly. He wrote this tragedy and cast my client as the villain. I felt several pairs of eyes turn toward me, but I kept my expression neutral. Let them suspect. Suspicion wasn't conviction. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they returned, the foreman stood with visible reluctance. On the charge of murder, in the second degree, we find the defendant. He paused, consulting his notes. Not guilty by reason of reasonable doubt. The courtroom erupted. Julian collapsed into his chair, sobbing with relief. Clara's mother screamed from the victim's family section. Reporters rushed toward the exits, phones pressed to their ears. I remained perfectly still, processing this unexpected turn. Julian Pierce was free, legally innocent, but his life was still destroyed. No one would hire the actor acquitted of his girlfriend's murder. His career was over, his reputation ruined, his future a blank page written in shame. Perfect. Outside the courthouse, Julian faced a wall of cameras and microphones. His statement was brief, delivered in a voice barely above a whisper. I didn't eliminate Clara. I loved her. Someone else took her life and tried to destroy mine. I hope someday the truth comes out. But I knew it never would. The case was closed, Julian was free but ruined, and I remained invisible. Detective Morales stood on the courthouse steps, watching Julian's press conference with obvious frustration. When a reporter asked if police would continue investigating, his answer was blunt. The case is closed. Mr. Pierce was acquitted by a jury of his peers. That evening, I returned to my lakeside cabin and opened a bottle of champagne. Clara was dead. Julian's career was destroyed. My revenge was complete. Outside, snow began falling on the frozen lake, covering everything in pristine white. Sometimes justice required patience. Sometimes it required perfect planning. And sometimes it required letting other people pull the trigger. 3 months after Julian's acquittal, I walked through Times Square like a ghost haunting his former life. The neon signs reflected off wet pavement, and tourists flowed around me without a second glance. The Orpheum Theater stood dark, its marquee announcing a new production of Chicago opening next month. No memorial plaque marked the spot where Clara had died. Broadway moved on quickly from tragedy. I bought a ticket to the matinee performance of Hamlet at the Public Theater, sitting in the same section where Clara and I had watched our first show together 15 years ago. During intermission, I overheard 2 theater critics discussing the industry's recovery from that horrible Pierce incident. Terrible business, one said. Though I hear Julian's trying to make a comeback in regional theater. Who would hire him? The man's toxic. They weren't wrong. Julian had indeed attempted a return to acting, taking small roles in dinner theaters and community productions. But audiences stayed away, and his name on a poster was box office poison. I'd followed his descent through industry websites and social media. The confident leading man had become a haunted figure, performing Shakespeare in church basements for audiences of 12. He'd lost weight, developed a drinking problem, and aged a decade in 6 months. Perfect revenge is watching your enemies survive their punishment. That evening, I returned to my cabin and found an envelope waiting on the front porch. No return address, just my name written in careful script. Inside was a single photograph, Clara, in her dressing room on opening night of Marriage of Mirrors, applying lipstick in the mirror. She looked radiant, alive, unaware that she had 3 hours left to live. A note was attached. Some ghosts don't stay buried. E.K. Eva Kimmel. She was still watching, still investigating, still trying to prove what she knew but couldn't establish in court. I built a fire in the stone fireplace and fed the photograph to the flames. Clara's image curled and blackened, her smile disappearing into ash. The next morning brought news that made me smile. Julian Pierce had been arrested for drunk driving in Albany, where he'd been performing King Lear for an audience of 8 people. His mugshot showed a man completely broken, hollow eyes, unkempt hair, the look of someone who'd lost everything and knew it. The article mentioned that he'd been alone in the car, driving back to a motel after the show. No friends, no support system, no future worth pursuing. I printed the article and added it to my scrapbook, the final entry in a story that had taken 2 years to complete. But that afternoon, Detective Morales called. "Vance, we need to talk." "About what?" "The Pierce case is closed. Not about Pierce, about you." We met at a diner near Lake George, the same place where I'd read about Julian's arrest that morning. Morales looked older, more weathered, like the case had aged him too. "Eva Kimmel committed suicide last week," he said without preamble. The words hit me like a physical blow. "What?" "Pills in her apartment. Left a note saying she couldn't live with what she knew but couldn't prove." I stared at him across the vinyl booth, my mind reeling. Ava's photograph, her continued investigation, her guilt over Julian's acquittal, it had consumed her. "She also left something for you." Morales slid an envelope across the table, her final message. Inside was a single sheet of paper with Ava's handwriting. "You won, but at what cost? Clara's dead. Julian's destroyed. Now I'm gone too. How many lives was your revenge worth? The real tragedy isn't what happened on that stage. It's what happened to your soul." I folded the note carefully and put it in my pocket. "She was a good kid," Morales said. "Smart, dedicated, passionate about theater. Your revenge eliminated her just as surely as it eliminated Clara." "I didn't eliminate anyone. Maybe not legally, but morally?" He shook his head. "You orchestrated a tragedy that destroyed 4 lives. Clara's, Julian's, Ava's, and your own." "My life is fine." Morales laughed bitterly. "Is it? You're living alone in a cabin, hiding from the world under a fake name. You've got no friends, no family, no real identity. That's not living, Vance. That's just existing." He stood to leave, then paused. "One more thing. Julian Pierce died yesterday." My blood turned to ice. "How?" "Overdose. Intentional, according to the note he left. Said he couldn't live with people thinking he was a murderer." Morales walked away without another word, leaving me alone in the diner booth with the weight of 4 deaths on my conscience. That night I stood on the dock behind my cabin, staring at the dark water. The lake was perfectly still, reflecting stars like scattered diamonds. Clara was dead. Julian was dead. Eva was dead. And I was alive but hollow, a ghost haunting my own existence. I'd gotten my revenge. I'd punished the wife who'd betrayed me and the man who'd stolen her. But victory tasted like ashes, felt like drowning in slow motion. The marriage of mirrors was complete. Everyone who'd entered the reflection had been destroyed, including me. I pulled Ava's note from my pocket and read it again by moonlight. "The real tragedy isn't what happened on that stage. It's what happened to your soul." She was right. I'd won the game, but lost myself in the process. The water lapped gently against the dock, and somewhere in the distance, a loon called across the empty lake. The sound was haunting, lonely, like the cry of something dying. I folded the note and put it back in my pocket. then walked inside to pour another glass of whiskey and stare at my reflection in the darkened window. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering the world in white silence.